In 1801, explorers paddled deep into the Amazon, looking for a lake few dared to talk about. They carried maps in powder form, but found footprints too wide for any animal and dead bodies crushed as if squeezed by coils. Warnings told of a water mother that moved when the trees bent back from the shore. Still, they kept going. What came up from those deep waters left only silence, scars, and a fear no map could hold. So, before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. We left from the opening of a narrow stream at sunrise with the heavy air pushing against our faces and the wetness of the night still trapped under the covers. Our two canoes sat low from bags of flour, salt pork, a box of powder and bullets, a small box of glass bottles, and the roll of maps that Captain Dewart guarded under waterproof cloth. I kept a notebook and took care of the samples. Father Celestino carried a wooden cross and a worn bag of herbs. Ramos, a soldier on loan from the army post at Barcelos, sat with a rifle across his knees and a bored look he did not try to hide. Arawa, our guide, stood in the front with a paddle in hand, and his young cousin Davi near his side, quiet and watchful. The job was simple on paper. We would follow a chain of dark water streams to a faraway lake that traders mentioned in half-finished sentences, take measurements, collect plants, mark the route, and return before the flood rose too high for safe landings. That was how the captain told it to the governor, and that was how he told it to us. The stream was narrow enough that branches leaned over us. The water ran black and slow with a stale taste where leaves rotted in mats under the surface. Fish rose without sound and made ripples on the skin of the water, then disappeared. Wetness crept into everything. After an hour, the sun could not break through the tree cover with any strength, and the heat sat still without relief. We moved by the steady rhythm of paddles tapping the surface and lifting again. No talking for long stretches, only the slide of boat bottoms and a soft knocking when a hidden root caught us. By noon, we came to a point where the current turned, and a clay bank held the footprints of something heavy that had pulled itself out and back again. The marks were wide and smooth with no claws, and the reeds were dragged flat. I thought of a river cow at first, and then changed my mind. The distance between the sweeps was longer than any eye had seen. Dwart looked at the mud and shrugged. Everything grows large here, he said. Even the tails. He did not like delays. He checked the sun, then called us back to the canoes. We passed the dead body of a capybara near the next bend. It lay stuck in a tangle with its ribs showing through dark skin. There were no bite marks along the edges. The body looked crushed in the middle, as if wrapped by bands. I measured the length of it with my eye and said nothing. Ramos poked it with the bottom of his rifle, and the whole mass shifted and slipped beneath the tangle. Davi stepped back on the seat without a word. I felt a sour taste in my mouth that came from more than the heat. In the afternoon, we met a pair of traders with a hollow tree boat pulled onto a sandbar. They had a small pile of gourds and baskets of dried fish, and their eyes moved between us and the bank without stopping. They asked where we were going. Arawa told them the name of the creek and the lake beyond. They did not repeat the word. The older man spit and said the opening of that lake was where the water mother slept and woke. He said the trees there leaned back from the shore. He held his hands apart and moved them in a slow circle, and I did not mistake his meaning. Wart offered tobacco, thanked them, and pushed us off. When we were out of hearing, he told me to write in the notebook that two men in a tree boat tried to frighten us for profit. I wrote only that we met them and traded tobacco. Toward evening, a thin film spread across the surface where a side stream joined ours. It shone with a faint rainbow-like shine that smelled of musk. The canoe glided through it, and the film parted and closed again. Flies rose in bursts and settled. Father Celestino wet a cloth and tied it over his mouth and nose. He pressed the cross to his chest with one hand and kept the other steady on the side. The water holds what it must, he said. He had a habit of speaking to no one in particular when discomfort grew. Ramos called ahead and asked if the smell came from a plant. Orawa did not answer. He nudged the front toward the middle where the black ran clearest. We camped on a raised patch where the ground was firmer than the mud around it. We cut palm leaves for a lean to shelter, set the fire in a ring of stones, and hung hammocks from 3 tree trunks. The fire smoked for a long time and would not make a strong flame. Mosquitoes dug into any patch of skin not painted with smelly grease. The meal was hard bread and salted meat softened in a pot. Davy ate without lifting his eyes. When the food was done, I cleaned the bottles and repacked them while the captain checked his maps again by firelight. He measured with rough fingers and made marks with a stub of charcoal that left dust on his knuckles. I watched his hands and thought that he trusted numbers and lines more than any living thing in that place. In the night, something bumped the boat twice, a soft thud, and then a longer scrape that traveled from front to back with slow pressure. I lay awake and counted my breaths. The scrape did not repeat. Somewhere out in the dark, a branch cracked. Water lapped on the far side of the point where we had pulled the canoes up and tied them. I kept my back to the fire and tried not to imagine the rope coming loose. In the morning, the knots held tight, but the sand around the fronts showed a shallow groove, as if something had pressed against them and shifted them inch by inch. I told myself the tide had lifted and dropped. The sun had not yet cleared the tree cover when we pushed off again. The banks changed after that. The trees drew back and left a collar of bare mud where no young trees took root. The water deepened under the surface without showing a change in color, and the paddle blades did not find bottom where they had before. There were no birds for a stretch that felt too long for chance. Every sound we made came back thin. I looked to the others and saw them avoiding each other's eyes. It was not fear yet. It was the feeling that our noise did not belong in that space. By noon, we saw the opening of the lake. The stream opened into still water that spread to a line of drowned tree trunks and floating logs. The surface held a pale scum near the shore and clear black in the middle. 2 poles stood at the opening, each wrapped with woven grass and marked with shallow cuts. Feathers hung from them. The bindings were new. Davy touched the edge of one feather and drew back his hand. "We should not cross," he said. I had not heard him speak a full sentence until then. I looked to the guide. Arawa stood with his jaw set and his eyes on the center of the lake. He did not answer his cousin, which told me enough. Dwart kept his voice steady. "We will go along the edge. We mark the size. We do not stay long." He did not look at the poles. He did not ask what they meant. He was tired of warnings. Father Celestino lifted his cross and made a sign over the water. He said a short prayer for safe passage and for restraint. Ramos checked the gunpowder in his rifle and grinned without humor. "If it is a fish, it will taste the same as any other," he said. I saw his hands shake when he set the weapon across his legs. We moved along the edge where the scum swirled in slow loops around the paddles. Bubbles rose in groups and popped. The smell of musk came again, stronger than before. I counted the time between the groups. There was no order to it. A large log turned by itself with no wind to move it. Our canoe drifted away from the other for a moment, and I pulled us back with 2 short strokes. I did not feel a current, yet we slipped sideways between strokes, and the hairs at the back of my neck lifted in a way I could not ignore. Near a tongue of reeds, Dobby pointed at something pale under the surface. It was a strip of tissue, long and narrow, caught on a sunken branch. It waved without the help of current, and then stopped. When we brought the canoe close, it came free and rose, and I caught it with the edge of my paddle and lifted it toward the front. It was the outer layer of shed skin, see-through and thick, with the pattern of scale edges pressed into it. The width of it made my mouth dry. I laid it along the seat without speaking. The captain looked at it and did not ask me to pack it. He told me to write about the find later. He did not meet my eyes. We heard a sound then that was not like the crack of branches or the push of a fish. It was the slow release of air through a wet passage, and then silence, and then the sound again farther off. It came from under the surface, not above it. We froze without instruction. The water around the front showed a series of rings that spread and touched the reeds, and then disappeared. I felt a cold line in my stomach that had nothing to do with the heat of the day. I waited for a third breath. It did not come. We reached a small rise at the edge of the lake where roots gripped the mud and gave us a place to step out. We made a noon fire to boil water and keep the mosquitoes off our faces. The fire caught better here. I took the skin to the shade and measured its width with a strip of cloth I kept for that purpose. I marked it and rolled it with care. I did not look toward the center of the lake again while I worked. Behind me, the others spoke in low voices. I heard Davi argue with the guide in his own language and then fall quiet. Ramos bragged that he would put a bullet through any beast that showed itself. He spoke to fill the air, and his words felt thin. I did not correct him. I watched the lines on the cloth and tried to think only of numbers. When we pushed off to continue the circle, the water darkened ahead in a moving patch. It was not the shadow of a cloud. The sky above us held no cloud. The patch passed, and we sat still and watched it slide under, slow and steady, without bubbles or fins. The canoes rocked in its wake with a motion that did not match the size of the disturbance. No one spoke. I did not raise my paddle. I felt the movement under us as a pressure in my bones more than a motion of the boat. I told myself then that we could still turn back. I looked at the poles at the opening of the lake and at the straight line of trees beyond. I thought of the distance already covered and the river rising later in the season, and of the reports we had promised to deliver. Then the patch of dark water curved, and the reeds on the far side bent, and slowly stood back up, and a wide V appeared in the scum, and held there pointing toward us. I rested my paddle across my knees, and kept my eyes on that V. I am not a brave man by nature, but at that moment, I did not feel fear in the way that freezes you. I felt a thread pulled tight inside me that said we had stepped into a place where the rules of the larger river did not work, and that everything we did from that point forward would carry weight. Ramos raised his rifle and kept it aimed at the center of the V. Bort did not tell him to lower it. The patch of dark water held steady. The air around us felt stale. Sweat ran into my eyes and stung. I wiped it away with the back of my wrist and did not look down. I heard a faint scraping from under the boat. Not wood on wood, not stone on wood, but the slow rub of something hard that bent. The canoe leaned a little bit and settled. In the other boat, Davi crouched and gripped the side. Arawa spoke to him in a low voice and shifted his weight to balance them. The V moved, it widened, and then split, each arm sliding apart. I saw a line appear under the surface that moved between them like the ridge of a moving back. The line passed under us in silence. Ramos twisted to follow it. There, he said. There. He wanted a command. No one gave it. The line faded and left only clear water. We took slow strokes along the reeds. The lake looked flat again. A turtle lifted its head near the scum edge and sank without a ripple. I wanted to believe we had imagined the pattern. I could not make myself believe it. I watched the reeds. Every few breaths, a narrow path opened inside the group and closed again. It made no sound. At the opening of a small inlet, we found a shelf of pale sand with marks on it. The marks were from a heavy body that had rolled once and then slid back into the water. The print of that roll had pressed palm-sized scales into the sand, each edge sharp. I stepped out and sank to my ankles. The heat of the sand surprised me after hours on the black water. I crouched and laid my hand against one scale mark. My fingers did not reach across it. Ramos came up beside me and planted the bottom of his rifle in the sand. He looked at the marks and swallowed. I will load again, he said. Though his gun was already loaded, he needed to say something. Dort did not step onto the sand. He stood in the canoe and checked the line of the shore. He spoke without looking at the marks. We continue along the curve and return by the far bank. Short stops only. No waiting. No waste of gunpowder. He had moved into the part of himself that held to the plan when things pushed against it. I had seen him enter that state when storms held us for days on a larger river. It did not always help him. We edged back into the lake. The sun slid toward the tree cover. The light took on a dull look that made distances hard to judge. In the back, Father Celestino counted under his breath and touched his cross to the side with each 10th count. He had a small habit for each kind of worry. I had not seen this one before. When he saw me notice, he nodded once and stopped the counting, but he did not let go of the cross. The first strike came without warning. The water bulged near the other canoe, and a length of dark body rose and slammed down across their front. The impact drove the forward half under and threw spray into the air. Davi cried out once and disappeared between the arms of the reeds. Arawa held to the side with one hand and swung his paddle with the other. The blade hit flesh with a flat crack. The length across the front bent and slid off, leaving deep cuts in the wood. The boat rocked hard and took in water. Ramos fired at the same instant. The gun aimed where the body had disappeared. The shot hit and the water foamed, but the bullet's path died in the black. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the musk. My ears rang. Davi, I called before I could stop myself. The reeds moved in two places, slow and purposeful. Arawa did not look at us. He plunged his arm into the reeds and dragged his cousin up by the shoulder straps. The boy coughed and clung to the seat. Blood ran from a cut on his cheek. He stared at the water and said nothing. His face had the look of someone who had come up from a depth too fast. I counted his breaths without knowing why. They steadied after a while. We bailed with gourds. The other canoe shed water in a slow trickle from the split seams. Gord pointed us toward a small island no larger than a room ringed with roots and driftwood. There, he said. We patch. No one argued. We moved with short, even strokes, keeping the paddles out of the deep sweep that had passed. The whole lake seemed to wait. On the small island, we lifted the damaged front into the fork of a root and packed fibers into the cuts. I melted sticky sap with a flame and spread it with the back of a spoon. The sap hardened in thick bands that held the fibers in place. My hands shook, and I breathed out through my nose to steady them. Ramos stood with his rifle half-cocked and watched the water. His jaw worked. Arawa leaned over Davi and checked his arms and legs for breaks. The boy pushed his hand away and sat up. He still had not spoken. Father Celestino soaked a cloth and wiped the blood from the cut. You are alive, he said. You stay alive by staying close. He did not offer more than that. The surface around the small island broke in three places at once. Each rise showed only the top line of a body. No head, no tail. The curves moved in slow, even circles that got tighter with each pass. They did not splash. They pressed the water aside and let it settle behind them. Gort gripped the boat and stared at the circles. He did not call a direction. I felt a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the air. I heard my own breath and the quick shuffle of Ramos's boots on the root. Back in, I said, and surprised myself by speaking first. We cannot wait for full dark. Gort blinked as if he had forgotten I was there. He nodded once. Go, he said. We keep close. No gaps. The sap had hardened enough to hold. We pushed the canoe down, slid it into the water, and loaded fast. Davi took the middle without protest. I gave him my gourd. He held it and did not use it. We aimed for the far bank where the drowned trunks rose out of the water. The circles followed. I counted 3, then a fourth that held back, and then closed the gap. The strokes needed to be steady to keep the fronts lined up, but my muscles wanted quick bursts. I kept the rhythm anyway. The first trunk we passed held the chopped remains of a small altar, twigs tied with new grass hung from it, a clay dish balanced in a split near the top. It held a paste that had dried and cracked. The smell was sharp and clean, unlike the musk. It cut through the taste in my mouth. Father crossed himself and reached toward the dish. Arawa slapped his hand away. Do not touch, he said. Not yours. His voice had no anger in it. It was flat, as if every extra word cost breath he could not spare. The water deepened under the trunks. The boat scraped something that was not wood. The canoe lifted and settled as if nudged from below. Vort raised his paddle as if to strike and then lowered it. Hold the line, he said. Do not strike unless it rises. He wanted to save energy for a clear shot. It was good advice. It did not comfort me. A broad head broke the surface 2 canoe lengths ahead. It did not rise high. It showed the top line of the skull and the line of the eyes, which were set wide. The skin was dark and thick with old scars that ran in straight paths. The head moved from side to side with no hurry. The mouth did not open. A low breath came out through the nostrils and spread across the water in a thin cloud that smelled of rotted leaves and fish oil. Ramos fired. The bullet struck the head above the right eye and flattened without breaking the skin. The animal slid under. The ripples reached us and tapped the boats like a hand. I felt a cold heaviness in my gut and thought of the capybara with the crushed ribs. We paddled harder. The circles tightened. A body rose under our back and lifted us half a hand out of the water. The boat slid over it and dropped. The shock ran through my teeth. Davi grabbed the side and held it as if the wood could save him from the lake. He was not praying. He had moved past words. The sun hit the top of the tree cover and threw bars of light across the open water. In that light, I saw a shape move that I had not seen before. It was not one body. It was two moving in a line, the second following the path of the first with a slight delay. The lengths were equal. The second held back when the first rose. When the first slid under our front, the second cut behind our back. The pattern repeated. They were working to divide us without touching the boats. I did not know if that was habit or purpose. I only knew it kept our paddles off balance and pushed us toward the deeper middle. Steady, I said. Pick a point and do not change. Bort fixed his eyes on a gap between trunks where a wedge of mud broke the line of the bank. There, he said, and for once his choice matched mine. We drove hard. My shoulders burned. I heard the scrape against the other canoe again, and then a sharp crack as a seat broke. The front dipped, and the water came in fast. I swung us around and put our back against their beam. Ramos tossed his rifle into our boat and climbed across without waiting for permission. The lighter boat rose. The damaged canoe settled to the sides. The guide and the boy stayed with it. They did not try to climb across. Arawa shoved the empty canoe toward the closest trunk to wedge it there. It stuck for a breath and then slid free and drifted. He did not watch it go. He put both hands on our side and pushed to keep our fronts lined up. He had decided to keep formation or die trying. The head rose again off our left front. Closer. This time I saw the lid of the left eye close and open. The skin there looked milky. The animal had old damage in that eye. I raised my paddle and brought it down on the line where head met body. The blow did nothing. The head turned toward me and paused. In that pause, I felt every part of my body prepare for the strike that did not come. Then it slid under with the same unhurried motion and left us rocking. We reached the wedge of mud and drove the front into it. The boat stuck and held. We leaped into water to our knees and dragged the boat farther onto the shelf. The second boat bumped behind us and scraped onto the mud. The two long bodies passed in a line just beyond reach and turned out toward the center again. The water over their backs smooth as if pressed by a board. I stood with mud up to my shins and my hands on the front rope and tried to slow my breathing. I looked at the faces of the others. Sweat streaked the dust on Ramos's cheeks. Father's lips moved without sound. Dwart's eyes were fixed on the open water. Bobby stared at the wedge of mud as if it were the only solid thing in the world. We do not cross again today, I said. No one argued. The light had lowered to the point where the trunks threw long bands across the lake. Anything moving between them would be harder to track. We climbed the small bank above the mud and found a patch where we could string hammocks between three roots. We set no fire. Smoke would bring attention and give us comfort without safety. We ate cold bread and strips of meat with our hands. It tasted of nothing. I kept the rolled skin near my bag and checked the sap patch with my thumb. It had held. As night settled, the lake gave the breath sound again at longer gaps and from farther off. One breath would come from near the center, and then, after a pause, another from the channel we had entered. The pattern repeated. It felt like a pair keeping a circle. I lay in the hammock and counted the gaps. My mind tried to make meaning from the spaces. I stopped counting and listened to the small sounds of the others shifting and whispering. I did not sleep for a long time. When I slept, it was thin. Close to dawn, a new sound came. It was a dull knock against wood, repeated at measured gaps. I slid from the hammock and moved to the edge of the mud. In the dim light, I saw our empty canoe bump against a trunk and drift, and then bump again. It had come back from wherever the water had carried it. It turned slowly until the cut front faced us. The sap patch looked pale against the dark wood. The boat rocked once more and came to rest against the mud at my feet. I could not decide if the return was chance or a gift. I only knew it was here. I pulled it up with both hands and felt the weight of wet wood and silt behind me. I heard Dwart drop from his hammock. He came to the edge and looked without speaking. "We repair fully," he said. "We plan a crossing in daylight. We make an end of this or we do not leave." He had given up the circle and moved to a different kind of determination. I did not call it courage, and I did not call it hopelessness. It was a single line he had set for himself when other lines failed. I wrapped the front rope twice around a root and tied it off. Then I turned to the others and began to divide the tasks for the morning. The air before dawn hung thick and still. We gathered what little dry fiber we could find beneath the roots and scraped sap from the seams of old branches. My hands ached from pulling at knots and stripping bark, but I did not let myself slow. The others worked without much speech. The boy stayed crouched by the front rope as if touching the wood anchored him. Father Celestino whispered a prayer under his breath while warming a strip of sap with an ember held between two stones. Ramos cleaned his rifle and checked the powder horn 3 times. Though he had fired only once, his eyes kept moving to the water. Dwart drew in the mud with a stick, marking paths from our point back to the stream. He did not look at the lines after he scratched them. He only set them down as if the act itself steadied him. By the time the sun reached the top of the tree cover, the patched canoe held shape again. The sap bands glistened where the morning heat had softened them and then hardened. We tested the boat in shallow water, rocking it from side to side. It groaned but did not open. The sound carried farther than I liked. Every ripple seemed loud against the still lake. I glanced at the reeds, half expecting them to part. Nothing moved. We ate a thin meal of flour mixed with water. No one wanted meat. Afterward, Dwart gathered us near the front. His face looked tired, the lines deeper than the day before. He spoke plainly. "We cannot circle the lake. We cannot wait on this point until the water rises. We cross the open and follow the far channel. Once we reach running water, the current will carry us. We stay close. No separation. No shots unless the body rises against the boat. If we are divided, we do not return for each other. Understand?" He looked at each of us in turn. No one argued. Even Ramos, who had always spoken against caution, nodded without a word. We shoved the canoes into the water and climbed in. The surface felt wrong from the first stroke. The paddles cut with no sound as if the black swallowed the movement. Our reflections blurred and bent under us. The air smelled of musk again. Arawa sat in the front of his canoe with his eyes fixed ahead. His cousin crouched close behind. The boy still had not spoken since being pulled from the reeds. His silence pressed harder on me than any sound. We aimed for a gap between two tall trunks where the channel should run. The distance was greater than it had seemed from shore. Halfway across, the water rose in a swell beneath us. Both canoes lifted, drifted apart, and settled. I gripped the side until my knuckles turned white. No strike came, only the swell and the silence that followed. Dwart hissed for us to keep line. We brought the boats together again. Then the first true attack came. A long shape shot from the black and struck the back of our boat. The blow threw me forward onto my knees. The boat spun half around. Water poured over the edge. Ramos fired blindly into the surface. The smoke rolled low and clung to the water. Arawa swung his paddle against the shape as it pulled back. The blade struck hard and split. He tossed the broken half aside and took the spear. The serpent's body rose once more, higher this time, showing the curve of its back. The skin glistened with a film of scum. Deep scars crossed it in lines. The head did not show. It slid back under with the same smooth power. We bailed fast. My hands burned from scooping water with a gourd. Davi pulled too, his silence broken only by quick breaths. The canoe steadied, though the back sat lower than before. My chest pounded. I tasted salt from sweat and gunpowder. I looked to Dwart. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed on the gap ahead. He did not waver, That steadiness was the only reason I kept my strokes even. Another rise came, this time on the side of the other canoe. The Serpent pushed up and rolled its length across their side. The boat tipped dangerously. Arawa braced with both legs and shoved with his paddle against the broad back. For an instant, I saw the full width of it stretched across their boat, thicker than any tree trunk, scales catching the light. Then it slid away. The canoe rocked back upright, half filled with water. Davi cried out and struck the surface with his palm as if to drive it back. His voice cracked, but did not carry far. The sound seemed swallowed by the lake. We paddled harder, aiming for the trunks. Every stroke felt slower than the last. The water dragged at us as if holding us in place. My arms shook. Ramos swore under his breath, repeating the same word again and again until it became nothing more than sound. Father Celestino began his count again, this time out loud, marking every 10th breath with a press of the cross. His voice held steady despite the shaking in his hands. The serpent's head rose at last. It broke the surface directly between the two canoes, close enough that drops struck my face. The eyes were black with no lids, the scar over one milky and pale, the nostrils open wide, and the breath that came out stank of rot and fish oil. The mouth opened a little bit, showing rows of thick, backward curved teeth. The sound that came was not a hiss. It was a low rush of air, steady and heavy, that seemed to shake the water itself. I froze. My hands still clutched the paddle, but did not move. The eye fixed on me and held. I felt as though my chest might stop. Then Dwart shouted, "Stroke." The command snapped me loose. We drove our paddles into the water. The serpent did not strike again. It slid back, leaving a trail of bubbles that widened and disappeared. The gap between the trunks drew closer. The water grew shallower beneath us. The paddle tips scraped silk. My arms ached with every pull, but we pushed on. Behind us, the surface bulged once more, but the body did not break again. We reached the channel, and the current at last took hold, pulling us forward with a speed we could not match by strength alone. We drifted fast between the trunks, the black water narrowing and swirling. The sound of the lake faded behind us. I turned and saw only the still surface, and the pale scum spread wide. Nobody followed. No breath sounded, only the trees leaning close and the current dragging us away. I let out a breath I had not known I held. We did not speak until the channel bent and the lake was lost behind the curve. Only then did Dwart lower his paddle and sag forward. His voice came low. "It is done. We leave it there." No one answered. I looked at the boy. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on the water ahead. He had not found his voice again. I feared he never would. We did not camp that night. We rode the current until our arms failed, then tied the canoes together and drifted under the stars. None of us slept. Every ripple felt like a warning. Every shadow looked like a coil. The river carried us whether we wanted it to or not. And in my mind, even as the sounds of the lake faded, I could still hear the slow, steady breath that rose from the black water, marking the measure of something too large for us to face. The current carried us until our arms stiffened. At dawn, we made shore at a bank of clay that sloped into the water. We pulled the canoes halfway up and sat in silence, too tired to build shelter or fire. The air was cooler, and mist clung to the branches above us. I closed my eyes for a moment, but did not sleep. Behind my eyelids, I still saw the wide head rising from the black lake. Davi broke the silence first. His voice was low. It followed us. We looked to him. His face was tired, eyes dark from lack of sleep. Arawa gripped his cousin's shoulder and spoke in their language, telling him to be quiet. But the boy shook his head and stared at the water. He repeated, "It followed." His words carried weight that I did not want to accept. Ramos spit into the mud. "We are free of it. The current is ours now." He said it too quickly. He wanted to believe his own words. Father Celestino raised his cross and whispered a prayer, then told us to stay near the bank and move at first light again. He avoided the boy's eyes. Bort said nothing. He was rolling his maps back into the waterproof cloth with steady hands. though I saw the shaking in his jaw. We launched again by noon. The river twisted narrower than before. The tree cover closed in overhead, throwing the water into shadow. Birds called from far away, but did not show themselves. I let the rhythm of paddling steady me. For an hour, nothing disturbed us. I began to think perhaps Ramos had been right. Then the surface broke behind us. A swell rose tall enough to rock both canoes. The sound that followed was the same heavy breath we had heard on the lake. Davi let out a cry and pressed his head to the side. Aurora held him tight. Ward looked back once and shouted, "Faster." We drove our paddles into the water, but the current was against us now, twisting in circles. The Serpent rose in the bend. It blocked the river with its length, head lifting above the waterline. Scars crossed its hide in all directions. One eye was clouded, the other fixed sharp on us. Its body stretched across the channel, cutting off any forward path. The current dragged us toward it. My chest turned cold. Ramos raised his rifle again. This time, Dwart did not stop him. The shot rang, echoing between the trunks. The bullet struck near the mouth. The Serpent jerked, but no blood showed. It let out a low, thunderous breath that shook the air. Then it surged forward, driving a wave toward us. The canoe slammed against the banks. Water poured in. We scrambled. Arao dragged Davi onto the bank. Ramos reloaded with panicked hands. Bort shouted for us to pull the boats. But before we could move, the Serpent lunged. Its head drove into the mud between the canoes, jaws closing on empty air, but crushing wood. One canoe split in half, pieces flying. I fell hard into the shallows, my mouth full of mud and water. I scrambled onto the bank, coughing. The beast thrashed, tail smashing against the surface, sending spray into the trees. Ramos fired again from the bank. This shot struck deeper, lodging near the jaw. The Serpent pulled back, twisting in pain. Arawa shouted and threw a burning sticky sap torch we had carried in the front. It struck the scarred side and clung there, smoke rising. The animal thrashed harder, the flame spreading across dried scum on its hide. Its body lashed the river in wide sweeps, breaking branches and shaking roots loose. The water boiled around it. I clung to a tree root, praying the bank would hold. Davi screamed once, then covered his face. The Serpent rolled, slammed its head into the bank, then slid back into the water with a hiss of steam where flame met scales. For a long moment, the river churned. Then the body slipped beneath the surface. Bubbles rose and spread, then stilled. The torch fizzled and went out on the bank. The water ran black again. We stood in silence, soaked and shaking. One canoe was gone, broken to pieces. The other lay cracked but floating. Bort's face was pale. He wiped mud from his eyes and whispered, "We move. Now." His voice shook for the first time since we left Barcelos. We loaded what we could into the cracked boat. Half our supplies were lost, but no one cared. We paddled with desperate strokes, every eye fixed on the surface behind us. For hours, nothing followed. The river widened and the tree cover thinned. By nightfall, we reached a sandbank where the current ran fast and shallow. We pulled the canoe up, collapsed in the sand, and let the river's roar drown every thought. In the morning, the water was clear. Birds called again. Fish broke the surface. It looked as though the world had closed the wound of the night before. Only the cuts in our canoe and the smoke-scorched torch remained as proof. We did not speak of turning back to the lake. Dwart marked the maps with quick strokes and shut them tight. Father Celestino said the beast was tied to that water, that it had followed only to drive us away. Orawa listened, but did not agree. He watched the river with eyes that saw farther than mine. Davi never spoke again. His silence remained until the end of the journey, a shadow heavier than any scar. Ramos carried his rifle, always loaded after that day, even when he slept. Ward reached Barcelos months later with half the samples he wanted. His map was smudged with wetness and mud, but he did not leave the river again. As for me, I wrote what I saw, though I know no governor or scholar would believe it all. Yet I remember the sound most of all, the steady breath rising from the black water, the measure of something ancient, that did not belong to our world, but made its home in it. And I know if ever